Hello, and welcome to Bruce World, How I See Things. If you haven't guessed it, I'm Bruce Handler. And with each episode, I plan to discuss a thought-provoking topic and, of course, share my point of view. To talk about humans and the interesting things we do, maybe teach you a thing or two, share some facts that are really true, and make you laugh at least once before I'm through. Hello, and welcome to episode 8 of my podcast, titled Hiring People. Is it best to just flip a coin or to actually interview candidates before making a hiring decision? Why flip a coin? Because a number of studies have been done that show most people who interview are not able to predict job success or fit. Then there's option 2. Let's say you don't have a coin readily available, or you find the following to be more fun. Take all the resumes you get in for a job opening, toss them high up in the air, and pick the first one that lands on the floor. As I indicated in my first podcast, I'm an HR person and willing to admit it, and have been one for pretty much forever, give or take. What I'm about to share are strictly my opinions, my Bruce World views, and do not in any way represent the views of the company I work for now, or companies I've worked for in the past, or companies I've even contemplated working for at any time, or any companies that may have driven by either in this lifetime or any previous lifetimes. You know, if I actually had an attorney, I think he might be very pleased with that statement. But what do you know? I'm not an attorney. I'm an HR professional. I will point out that what I'll be sharing is backed up by crazy things like research, evidence, data from such sources as the Harvard Business Review, Forbes, Fortune, as well as from various experts in the field, from other publications or interview practices. I've always found this topic to be quite interesting since, in my opinion, it's the most important decision that a manager can ever make, and we pretty much all experience this either as an interviewee, aka job candidate, or as an interviewer, aka a person involved in the hiring process who asks you the questions. Yet it's often done so poorly, and the approaches to interviewing have changed so little over the last 35 years, which is about how long I've worked in HR, despite their general lack of effectiveness. Now, HR people, as they're listening to this, are starting to get mad at me. I can feel it. Now, for certain HR people out there, and you know who you are, you're thinking, sorry, Bruce from Bruce World, but you are so wrong, so off base, because there's this process called structured behavioral interviewing, and if you use that technique, then you'll end up hiring really good people. Sorry, you may think that, but we'll get to why that technique has many flaws. More on that later, which may actually force you to listen to my whole podcast. Okay, now back to me. So what I didn't mention in my first podcast was that I actually worked as a recruiter some years ago, interviewing at times as many as 9 candidates in a day. And I also have history managing a recruiting function prior to the company that I work for now. And over the years, I've taken a number of interviewing training programs, and I've even taught interviewing to others, but not realizing what a waste of time most of that was, given what I've since learned about interviewing effectiveness later in my career. Now, like most people managers, I've interviewed people when I've had job openings, and I've been asked by other hiring managers to interview people for their openings as well. That is until they find out I reject most candidates I interview or offer no opinion at all after my interviews, at least maybe 70 to 80% of the time. Well, why is that, Mr. Bruce? It's for multiple reasons. I'm often given little time to interview and assess the candidates. Like most people in corporate America, it's about 30 minutes on average occasionally 45 if you get really lucky. And that needs to include time for a little small talk to help put the candidate at ease, to let them know what to expect during the interview, like please be brief when you answer my questions, given the limited time we have, and to give them time to ask questions at the end, where there's generally a whole 5 minutes at best for them to do this. Now, unlike a number of my colleagues over the years who must have that special gift to assess a candidate in about 20 to 25 minutes of real interview time, I find it very hard to make such an important decision and determine if the person is both qualified and a good fit for the role and the work environment in the time that it takes to get an oil change. I also find that so many candidates provide canned, prepared, and studied answers, and why not? They're all over the internet. I also find that candidates are often not being genuine, being themselves, but acting more like actors. That they embellish or literally make stuff up to try and look good. So, do you really know what the actual person is like, their capabilities, and if they're a good fit? Let's digress and talk about lying for a minute. Now, I have interviewed several hundred people during my career, and only one has ever admitted they left the job because they got fired. Well, we know that many more than one also got fired. Which leads me to an occasional fantasy that I might have of hooking people up to a lie detector and then asking interview questions. And it would beep every time the person lied. Now, although many people want to leave their job because basically they hate their boss, their company, the work, the workload, coworkers, or all the above, candidates are highly unlikely to share this because they've been told on the internet, this is a bad idea. The interviewers would look at you negatively, so instead lie and give them more generic, pat answers like, I'm seeking a promotion, or greater responsibility, or I want to learn something new. I'm looking for a new challenge, or I want to be able to better apply my skills. On occasion, these reasons are true, but they're hardly the whole story, and so I can't help it. When I hear these reasons, I do sometimes have a tendency to gag, especially if they sound so rehearsed while giving them. Now, many people who interview candidates can be so quick to give a thumbs up or a thumbs down, but if I'm unsure about the candidate because I don't have enough time to properly assess them, then I simply abstain from voting. I also have a good BS detector and can catch people playing the interview game, and sadly, it's turned into a game. So I can catch them when they're giving me that standard canned answer versus being themselves. And I hit the reject button. And I have to admit, sometimes people are so full of it or full of themselves that I wish I could hit a button on my desk and have a trapdoor open, and then the person falls through it and they land in this large container of plastic balls like the kind you find at a Chuck E. Cheese, and all the balls have the letters BS on them. Weird what I think about in my spare time. Speaking of quick decisions, it is quiz time. Are you ready? So what percentage of interviewers make their decision within the first 60 seconds of an interview? The answer? 5%. If you got that right, award yourself 12 points. Now, the people who are able to do this, I assume, are probably psychic and make their quick decision by reading a handshake or the magnetic field they pick up on from the candidate. But here's the more scary figure because of how big it is. 52% make a hiring decision between only 5 and 15 minutes into an interview, also known as between 300 and 900 seconds, which is about how long it takes the average American to take a shower prior to their interview. But wait, hold on. Why are these decisions made so fast? Is it because people are so fantabulous at interviewing and assessing people, or might it be due to other factors? Inquiring minds and my huge audience wants to know. If you said it was due to other factors, you are correct, so give yourself a pat on the back and 50 extra points. Why the quick decisions? Well, it's based on two things that tie together, likability and bias. There are certain types of people we tend to like and others that we don't. In general, we like those who are most like us. They may look like us, act like us, think like us, have similar interests or backgrounds, may even talk like us. So if you want to make a better hiring decision, simply find someone in addition to yourself to interview candidates who is totally unlike you. Now, in college, I had a career counselor who studied interviewing as a hobby, and that tells you what an exciting life he had. But he discovered the mirror technique. I've used it. I've taught it. I'm confident it gives you an edge. And again, interviewing has turned into a bit of a game. When you're being interviewed, if you mirror, also known as mimic, how the interviewer is sitting, moving their head, their hands, their legs, even talking, but you don't want to be an exact match or they may catch on. When you do this mirror technique, the interviewer is more likely to like you. Why? Because they think you're like them. And yes, it is sad that there are people who have an interviewing edge for such very superficial reasons. And can you guess what they are? So people with the following characteristics are generally more well-liked by interviewers. Not going to be a surprise, I'm sure. They're thinner, more likely to be in shape. Tall. It's amazing the large percentage of CEOs and how much taller they are than the average man. They're attractive. They're extroverts. They're friendly and personable. And believe it or not, they also have deeper voices, which people assume indicates more confidence. If you want to remove bias from your interview process, you're better off not seeing the person and not having them see you and having their voice modified if you want to make a fair and better hiring decision. Are you getting all this down? Now let's switch gears and talk a little bit about stress, anxiety, and pressure. Always a fun topic. What some companies and managers think is a good idea is to introduce stress into the interview. This is known in HR technical terms as a really dumb idea. Let me explain how bad this idea is. The average person performs significantly worse under stress. They have a much harder time remembering things. Their confidence level drops. They're less likely to be themselves. But other than that, it's a fun thing to do. What causes all this stress? Let's start out with panel interviews. Having multiple people interview someone at the same time is a major stressor. Asking off-the-wall hypothetical questions are also a stressor. For example, if you were to pick an animal or superhero that best represented you, what, who would it be, and why? Now, I personally would go with the Moose and the Incredible Hulk, if I was being honest. But who's honest in interviews? And I'll leave an explanation for the Moose and the Incredible Hulk selection for another day. Here's another fun stressor. Hey, you have 10 seconds to come up with 3 ideas on how to address the following problem. When interviewing with one company, I was told I'd be given a complex Harvard Business Review case. I would have only 15 minutes to read it, 10 minutes to propose a well-thought-out and detailed solution in front of a panel of all the senior executives at the company, even though the case had nothing to do with the job that I was interviewing for. In other words, it had nothing to do with HR. I asked the recruiter, is there any validity to doing this? And he said, no, it's just something they've done for a long time. Guess what? I immediately withdrew from the interview process based on how stupid I thought it was to put candidates through that stressful experience, and it was very telling to me about the type of executive team I'd be supporting. But the most stressful interview I'd ever experienced was only the 3rd one I'd ever gone through in my life, and I was only 22. The Chief Human Resources Officer, a.k.a. the head of HR, gave me my resume and said, this job requires a lot of recruiting. So what I would like you to do is have you interview yourself while I observe. Really? Are you kidding me? Come up with my own questions on the spot in front of you and then answer them as if I was talking to another person. He had me do this for 30 minutes. It was an awful experience, and I did a miserable job. And I sweat right through my 3-piece suit. But I got the job anyway, making me wonder what the heck that interview technique of his was all about. Did he just enjoy freaking people out? Was he a sadist or both? P.S. I only lasted 6 months in that job before I quit because here comes an honest answer. I hated my boss. She acted more like a robot than a person. She almost never spoke to me and left it up to me to figure out the job on my own. Now, if you want to get the best out of the person during the interview, it is so important to help them feel comfortable, at ease, and not stressed. Having interviewed so many people during my career, I can tell you how stressed people were just by the fact they were being interviewed. Years ago, I had a new college graduate answer one question, then she got up from her chair and walked out of the office. And she was in such a hurry to leave, she forgot her jacket and her purse. She did come back for them later, said she was sorry, and then left. Never to be heard from again. Now, about halfway through another interview, I had a person just start crying uncontrollably, telling me she hated being interviewed and that nobody would hire her. Well, after she calmed down, she did fine. And yes, she got the job. I had another person who walked into my office and proceeded to sit in my chair behind my desk before realizing he was sitting in my seat. Another person cannot seem to remember their background without referring constantly to their resume, even when it had to do with the most basic question, like the name of the last company they worked for. I had another person freeze up when I asked some questions and they could not come up with any answers, even though the questions were pretty straightforward, and I told them to take their time. I have also seen people sweat profusely and watch the sweat drip off their forehead, and I've offered them napkins and Kleenex, but obviously they were quite embarrassed. And lastly, during an interview, some people have repeatedly referred to me and or the company by the wrong name, and in fact, one time somebody called me by the company's name. Now, I'd be remiss if I didn't share a few stories about people who were not nervous, just self-destructive. There was one candidate who insisted on asking me questions before I interviewed him. Then there was the interrupter candidate who kept interrupting me and said, I think I know where you're going, so let me just go ahead and answer it before I finish my question. There was the overly gregarious candidate who did not want to stop talking, even when I interrupted him so we can move on to the next question. And another person thought it was cool to swear while answering questions, and another thought it'd be funny to interject some inappropriate jokes. Well, the worst were those who chose to get into arguments with me and actually raise their voices. The best being a person who asked me at the end of the interview if there was any reason they would not get the job. I said, I don't share that information with candidates after an interview. Well, this person got so angry at my response and proceeded to tell me how ridiculous it was and that he had every right to know how he did. And can you guess if he got the job or not? If you said not, then give yourself another 25 points. One simple solution to improve our ability to hire qualified candidates that are also a fit, and it does not involve rocket science or a degree in quantum physics or any great intellect for that matter. It's just time. Increasing the amount of time we spend with each person. However, even though it's the most important management decision a people manager can make, we've gotten into these bad habits in corporate America, and the average time for interviews is usually about 30 minutes. And that doesn't even take into account that an interview may run over, so the next one starts late, giving that person even less time to interview. And we also have this unfounded belief that it should not take very long to assess a candidate. Well, when I want to buy a bicycle, a golf club, motorcycle boots, an exercise bike, an air fryer, or a new gas grill, I spend more than 30 minutes researching these items, reading articles, comparing products, reading reviews, to feel confident in my purchase. Now, I was trained by an expert in interviewing, and he's recommended that an interview should take 2 to 3 hours. Although it should not be the 3-hour interview that I once experienced, which ironically was conducted by a head of HR. He opened with the old, "Tell me about yourself" question, a lousy question, and a sign you're in for a bad interview. But a clever response is to come back with, "Is there something in particular you'd like me to focus on?" Now, he chose to ignore that and said, "Let me do what I always do. Let's start with when you were 5 and tell me everything that happened in your life that was important, how you grew up, and then we'll kind of go from there." Now, before I explain why, let me explain that companies also have a very, very bad habit of having many people involved in the interview process, including some who have no interest interviewing people and some who are awful at it. And they often have multiple rounds of interviews. And there seems to be this need to involve an army to make this decision. So I can only imagine people balking at spending hours interviewing. But the thing is, if interviewers were this long and you involved the right people in the interview process, you would improve the quality of your hiring. It would actually save you a lot of time and money. And also, once you have more than a few people interview a candidate, you start experiencing diminishing returns. You create a drawn-out process, which may result in the loss of good candidates and create confusion because you have too many opinions. Oh, and P.S., regardless of the number of people involved in the interview process, the hiring manager most often goes with their pick, regardless of what others think, with the exception of their boss. Now, after reading various articles on this subject, it seems that 3 to a max of 4 people are all that's needed to interview candidates once they've been pre-screened by a recruiter. 2 of the people who should always be involved are the hiring manager and their manager. And a third person should be someone very much unlike the hiring manager to help reduce bias in the interview process. Why the 2 to 3 hours for professional or managerial positions, and why about 1 to 1.5 hours for an hourly employee? Because you need time to create a low-stress environment, to spend time on small talk, to have time to allow candidates to get to know you, for you to understand them and for them to understand the job, the department, the company, the work environment, to help them and you decide, is this a good fit? Versus giving them all of 5 minutes to ask you questions during the normal length of an interview. Based on how interviews are structured, they're very one-sided, and there's just not enough time given to the candidate to learn what they need to make an informed and thoughtful decision. And oh, how can I be such a silly goose? I've talked all this time about interviewing and not once have I really discussed behavioral interviewing until now. The so-called greatest thing since sliced bread to use to interview candidates, which, by the way, has now been around for over 2 decades. You know, these are the annoying questions that almost always start out with, give me an example of a time when this happened, like you had to deal with an angry customer, a difficult coworker, or an obstacle in getting your project done. And then they ask, why did you do that? How did you do that? And here is why this often doesn't work. At this point, a number of my HR colleagues are falling off their chairs. Or screaming at my podcast thinking this is blasphemy. However, my HR friends, you can pretty much find every behavioral interview question on the internet. So candidates can easily prepare. There's no way of knowing if what the candidate is sharing is the truth when asked these questions. And people don't remember much, and not for very long. And this technique relies on memory more than anything else. And because people don't often remember specific examples, let alone what they ate for breakfast the previous day, it's not unusual for people to then make up part or all of their answers. P.S. Lots of managers will also tell you they hate this method. They find it awkward and limiting in what they want to ask. And there's no focus on technical skills, which, I don't know, are kind of important, don't you think? Well, it looks like we're about out of time. Wait, just kidding. I promise I'm not going to end it there. I guess I should share how interviewing can be better than a coin flip or tossing resumes in the air. And that assumes you lengthen the interviews as I suggested and keep the number of interviews to 3 or 4. So here are the top 11 things to do or your money back guaranteed. Number 1, ask people the same questions. Number 2, turn the interview into a conversation so the candidate is more likely to let their guard down. Share information about yourself. Engage in small talk. Have them talk about what their most recent company does, services, products they provide, who their competition is, how their future looks, and why. This puts them at ease, and it also gives you a sense of how well they know their company. Clever, isn't it? Have them walk you through their last few jobs. Specifically, ask about their top 4 responsibilities and what they entailed, which they liked the most and least, and why. What were the most and least challenging aspects of their job? What they liked about working there, and a few things they wished were different and why they left. Number 4, ask to share 1 accomplishment per job, up to 3 or 4. This is key. People often remember their accomplishments. Dig deep, because you can learn so much from this. Ask them to walk you through how it came about, the role they played, challenges they ran into, how they dealt with them. What was successful about it? How did they know that? What did they learn? What would they have done differently? Asking about likes and dislikes is more powerful and an easy indirect way to determine interests and fit. A bit sneaky, but effective. Also, asking about learnings tells you more about them than asking what their weaknesses are, which they won't be honest about anyway. And if they say things all went well and there were no learnings, that's a red flag. That would make me reject them. If they did not come up with any ideas to initiate those projects or accomplishments that they worked on, that's also a red flag. 5, you want to make sure they've done the things, have the experiences in those areas that they're required for in your role. So focus your time there. Simply ask, have you done this or not? And if so, what did it entail? Number 6, switch gears for a minute to give them a break, a breather. Ask them to talk about the job opening for a bit and ask about what about the job and the company interests them the most and the least, and what do they know about the company? And if they know very little about your company, is this somebody that you want to consider given all the available info on the internet? Number 7, ask them to describe their personality, and if it's based on any tests that they may have taken, and if so, which ones? And what are the pros and cons of that personality style? If they don't share any cons, call them out on it and say you're looking for something more specific and or more information about the cons. If they still gloss them over, I view that as a reason to reject them. If you're interviewing for a people leader, I would ask them the same thing, but this time about their leadership style. Number 8, describe the opportunity, the department, the culture, and be honest. Don't make everything sound like roses and candy. And ask what they learned that they liked and what they learned that concerns them based on what you just shared. And if they say everything sounds great, that's a red flag. Number 9, ask them to share their top 5 most important questions. And I would reject any candidate that couldn't come up with at least 5 quality questions, which would show their level of interest in learning enough to make an informed decision. Number 10, now for a cool technique. And I came up with it all by myself. One way to help ensure you get more truthful answers is to imply that you may ask to see something like their performance review, their employee opinion survey results, a 360-degree assessment or peer assessment, or some other assessment that they say they've gone through, by asking if one was done and when, and then say, if I were to see this document, what would I find? Tell me the highlights. And what do and don't you agree with regarding the findings, the ratings, the comments? And what have you done in response to them? The last helpful tool is testing. There's a number of tests out there in the market that can help you determine fit for a job and culture, but they're so underutilized by many companies because they don't want to bother with the cost. For the most important decision a hiring manager can make. And what does a bad hiring decision and turnover cost? Many thousands of dollars. Okay, folks, I don't know about you, but I'm all interviewed out. I've run out of questions and I've run out of answers, and even with all the information I've provided here today, there really is no foolproof way to ensure you'll hire a qualified person who's a great fit. But hopefully, what I've shared will help you do a better job than just flipping a coin or tossing resumes in the air or going eeny, meeny, miny, mo. Catch a candidate by the toe. So thanks for stopping by, and thanks for listening, if you're still awake. I hope you were entertained, maybe learned something new, smiled a time or two, and here's to having at least an okay day. And if you don't, that you have what it takes to make it through. This is Bruce from Bruce World, the way I see things, and I hope you'll join me for my next episode.